The stagecoach lay on its side like a wounded animal, one wheel still spinning slowly in the hot Arizona dust, and Hannah Harper stood beside it with nothing but the torn calico dress on her back, and the realization that everything she owned had just burned with the overturned coach. The driver was dead, his neck twisted at an angle that made her stomach turn. The other passengers had scattered during the Apache raid, running into the desert like frightened rabbits, and she had no idea if any of them still lived. She stood there on the road between Tucson and San Bernardino, California, watching black smoke curl into the impossibly blue sky, her hands trembling at her sides. The year was 1873, and Hannah had been traveling west to meet a man she had agreed to marry through letters, a shopkeeper in San Bernardino who had promised her a new life after her parents died of fever back in Missouri. Now that future seemed as distant and impossible as the mountains shimmering in the heat on the horizon. Her throat burned with thirst. The canteen she had carried was somewhere in the wreckage, probably melted by now. The sun beat down on her head with merciless intensity, and she knew she would not last long out here without water or shelter. She looked down the empty road in both directions, seeing nothing but scrub brush and the occasional twisted Joshua tree reaching toward the sky like a many-armed prophet. She had just decided to start walking, though she had no clear idea which direction offered the best chance of survival, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Her heart jumped into her throat. Were the Apache coming back? She looked around desperately for somewhere to hide, but the landscape offered nothing, just flat desert and low bushes that would not conceal a child, let alone a grown woman. The rider appeared over a rise in the road, and she felt a surge of relief when she saw he was not Apache but a white man on a big roan horse. He sat tall in the saddle, wearing a dusty black hat pulled low over his eyes, a dark vest over a faded blue shirt, and leather chaps that had seen hard use. A gun belt hung at his hip, and a rifle was strapped to his saddle. As he drew closer, she could see he was young, probably not much older than her own 22 years, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days of stubble and eyes that were startlingly blue beneath the brim of his hat. He pulled up his horse when he saw her, his gaze moving from her face to the overturned stagecoach and back again. His expression remained carefully neutral, but she saw something shift in those blue eyes, a flash of concern or maybe pity. "You hurt." His voice was deep and rough, like he did not use it much. Hannah shook her head, not trusting herself to speak. Now that help had arrived, she felt dangerously close to tears. He swung down from his horse with an easy grace, looping the reins over his arm. Up close, she could see he was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of a man who worked hard for his living. He walked over to the stagecoach, looked inside, then checked the driver's body. His jaw tightened slightly when he confirmed what she already knew. "Apache?" he asked, turning back to her. She nodded. "They came out of nowhere, started shooting. The driver tried to outrun them, but the wheel hit a rock and we overturned. I thought they would kill me, but they just took the horses and left." He nodded as if this made perfect sense to him. "Lucky. They must have been a raiding party moving fast. If they had wanted to take the time, well." He did not finish the sentence, but she understood well enough. "The other passengers ran," she said. "I don't know what happened to them." He looked out at the desert, his eyes scanning the horizon with practiced ease. "If they ran without water, they are probably dead by now. Desert does not forgive mistakes." He said it matter-of-factly, without emotion, and she realized that out here, death was simply a part of life, not something to get sentimental about. "I'm Zachary Dalton," he said, turning back to her. "I have a ranch about 10 miles south of here. You are welcome to come with me. Not much else you can do out here." "Hannah Harper," she managed to say, her voice coming out hoarse and cracked. "I would be grateful. I have no money to pay you, though. Everything I had was in the coach." He waved a hand dismissively. "Did not ask for money." He walked back to his horse and pulled a canteen from his saddle, handing it to her. "Drink slow, just a little at a time." The water was warm and tasted slightly of metal, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever experienced. She forced herself to follow his instructions, taking small sips even though she wanted to gulp the entire canteen. When she handed it back, he took a drink himself, then replaced it on his saddle. "Can you ride?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "It has been a while." "You will ride with me then. Storm can carry double for 10 miles. He patted the roan's neck affectionately, and the horse woofed and tossed its head. He mounted first, then reached down to pull her up behind him. She hesitated for just a moment, suddenly aware that she was about to ride off into the desert with a complete stranger. But what choice did she have? Stay here and die of thirst, or trust this rough-voiced cowboy with the careful eyes? She took his hand, surprised by the callous strength of it, and let him pull her up behind the saddle. She had to put her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off, and she felt him tense slightly at the contact before relaxing. "Hold on tight," he said, and then they were moving, the horse settling into a steady lope that ate up the miles. Hannah pressed her face against his back, smelling sweat and leather and dust and something else, something that was just him. His body was solid and warm, and despite everything that had happened, she felt safe for the first time since the attack. They rode in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves, the creak of leather, and the wind whistling through the desert scrub. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon when they topped a rise, and she saw his ranch spread out below them. It was modest, just a simple wooden house with a covered porch, a barn, a corral with several horses, and a few outbuildings. But after the emptiness of the desert, it looked like paradise to her. They rode into the yard, and Zachary dismounted, then helped her down. Her legs were shaky from the long ride, and she stumbled. He caught her elbow, steadying her. "House is not much," he said, sounding almost apologetic. "But it is solid. Built it myself 2 years ago." "It looks wonderful," she said honestly. He led her inside, and she found herself in a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. A door on the far wall presumably led to a bedroom. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's home. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and a black iron stove stood in the corner that served as the kitchen. "You can have the bedroom," Zachary said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. Without the hat, she could see his hair was dark brown and slightly too long, curling at his collar. "I will sleep out here." "I cannot take your bed," Hannah protested. "You can and you will," he said firmly. "I have slept in worse places than my own floor." He walked to a cupboard and pulled out a glass, filling it with water from a pitcher. "Drink this. Then you should rest. You have had a hard day." She took the glass, her fingers brushing against his. For a moment their eyes met, and she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch, a warmth that contradicted his gruff manner. Then he looked away, busying himself with lighting the stove. "I will make some food," he said. "Nothing fancy, just beans and bacon. But it will fill your stomach." Hannah sank into one of the wooden chairs at the table, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had kept her going was draining away, leaving her feeling hollow and shaky. She watched him move around the kitchen with efficient, economical movements, a man comfortable in his own space. He did not try to make conversation, and she was grateful for that. She was not sure she could have managed small talk just then. When the food was ready, he set a plate in front of her and sat down across the table with his own. The beans were simple but seasoned well, and she ate hungrily, not realizing how famished she was until the food was in front of her. He ate steadily, his eyes occasionally flicking up to her face before returning to his plate. "You said you were traveling to San Bernardino," he said when they were both finished. "You have family there?" She shook her head. "I was going to meet a man. We have been corresponding through letters. He asked me to marry him, and I accepted. I have no family left back east. My parents died 6 months ago, and there was nothing to keep me in Missouri." Something flickered across his face, but it was gone too quickly for her to read. "This man expecting you?" "Yes." "The stage was supposed to arrive tomorrow. He will be worried when I do not come." Zachary nodded slowly. "San Bernardino is about a 4-day ride from here, maybe 5. I can take you there once you have rested a few days." "I cannot ask you to do that," Hannah said quickly. "You have already done so much. You did not ask. I am offering." He stood and collected their plates, carrying them to a wash basin. "Out here we help each other. It is how we survive." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by his casual kindness. She stood abruptly, suddenly desperate to be alone before she broke down completely. "I think I will take that rest now if you do not mind. Door on the left," he said without turning around. "There are clean blankets on the bed." The bedroom was small and simply furnished, with a bed, a dresser, and a trunk at the foot of the bed. A single window looked out over the desert, now painted gold and purple by the setting sun. Hannah sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, and finally let the tears come. She cried for the driver who had died, for the other passengers who might be dead or dying in the desert, for her parents, for the life she had left behind, and for the uncertain future that lay ahead. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she lay down on the bed, not bothering to undress, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Morning light was streaming through the window, and she sat up with a start, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. Her dress was wrinkled and dusty, and she felt grimy from head to toe. She stood and tried to smooth her hair, which had come loose from its pins during the long ride yesterday. When she emerged from the bedroom, Zachary was standing at the stove, his back to her. He had changed his shirt and looked slightly more presentable than he had yesterday, though he still needed a shave. "Morning," he said when he heard her. "Coffee is hot and breakfast will be ready in a minute." "Is there somewhere I could wash up?" Hannah asked hesitantly. "I must look a fright." He turned to look at her, and again she saw that flash of warmth in his eyes. "You look fine," he said, then seemed to catch himself. "But yes, there is a basin on the porch. I will bring you some warm water." After breakfast, he gave her a clean shirt of his to wear while he washed her dress, which she had thought to do herself until he simply took it from her hands and carried it outside to a large tub. The shirt hung on her like a tent, but it was clean and smelled of sunshine and soap, and she was grateful for it. She spent the morning exploring the ranch while he worked, mending a section of fence that had come loose. The property was beautiful in a stark, austere way. The desert stretched out in all directions, dotted with sagebrush and Joshua trees, and in the distance, she could see mountains rising purple against the sky. The air was clear and dry, and the silence was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a bird or the whisper of wind through the brush. She found him in the corral after lunch, working with a young horse, a pretty paint mare that seemed skittish and uncertain. He moved slowly and carefully, speaking in a low, soothing voice that she could barely hear. The horse watched him with wide eyes but did not run, and gradually, minute by minute, she saw the animal begin to relax. "She is beautiful," Hannah said from her position by the fence. Zachary glanced at her but did not stop what he was doing. She is green but smart. Should make someone a good horse once she is trained. You train horses, among other things. I have a small herd of cattle. Do some work for neighboring ranches when they need an extra hand. Break horses for folks who do not have the time or the patience. He approached the mare, hand outstretched, letting her sniff him before gently stroking her neck. It is enough to get by. Hannah watched him work for a while longer, fascinated by his patience and the obvious bond he was building with the nervous animal. There was something deeply attractive about his competence, the quiet confidence with which he moved. She found herself wondering about him, about his history, and what had brought him to this lonely corner of Arizona. That evening, after another simple meal, they sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the sky turn from blue to gold to deep purple. Zachary had finally shaved, and she could see the strong lines of his face more clearly now. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, with a straight nose, high cheekbones, and a mouth that looked like it did not smile often but would be devastating when it did. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. 3 years, he said. Came out from Texas after the war, did not want to go back to what was left there. She did not need to ask which war. The conflict between the states had ended 8 years ago, but its scars were still fresh for many. "You fought," he nodded. "I was young, thought I understood what I was doing, but I did not understand anything." He was quiet for a moment. "War is not what you think it will be. It is not glory or honor. It is just death and more death, until you cannot remember what you were fighting for in the first place." Hannah heard the pain in his voice and instinctively reached out, placing her hand over his where it rested on his knee. He looked down at their joined hands and she saw his throat work as he swallowed. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I should not have asked." "It is all right," he said, but he did not pull his hand away. "It was a long time ago. I am different now than I was then." They sat like that for a while, her hand on his, watching the stars come out one by one. Hannah felt something shifting inside her, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the lingering heat of the day. She barely knew this man, but she felt drawn to him in a way she had never experienced before. He was solid and steady and real, and sitting beside him felt like the most natural thing in the world. The next day he took her into town, a small settlement about 5 miles from his ranch that consisted of a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of houses. He bought her a dress and some undergarments from the store, along with a pair of sturdy boots and a bonnet, refusing to let her worry about payment. "You can pay me back someday if you want," he said when she protested. "Or not. Either way is fine." The storekeeper's wife, a plump woman named Mrs. Henderson, took Hannah aside and helped her try on the dress, which was simple but well made, a deep blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. "That cowboy treating you all right?" Mrs. Henderson asked in a low voice as she adjusted the fit of the dress. "Yes," Hannah said quickly. "He has been nothing but kind." Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. "Zachary Dalton is a good man, keeps to himself mostly, but he is always the first to help when someone needs it. You could do worse." Hannah felt her cheeks heat. "Oh no, it is not like that. He is just helping me get to San Bernardino." The older woman gave her a knowing look, but did not say anything more. On the ride back to the ranch, Hannah was acutely aware of Zachary's presence behind her. He had insisted she ride in front this time, and his arms bracketed her on either side as he held the reins. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back, hear the beating of his heart. "Thank you for the clothes," she said. "I will find a way to repay you, I promise." "Already told you that is not necessary." His voice rumbled through his chest into her back. "You were in need. I had the means to help. That is all there is to it. But it did not feel like that is all there was to it." Every moment she spent with him, she felt herself becoming more aware of him, of the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking, of the careful way he avoided touching her except when necessary, as if he did not trust himself. And she was becoming aware of her own feelings, the way her heart sped up when he walked into a room, the way she found excuses to be near him. That night, unable to sleep, she got up and went to the kitchen for a drink of water. She found Zachary sitting at the table, papers spread out in front of him, working by lamplight. "Sorry," she said. "I did not mean to disturb you." "You did not," he said, looking up. His eyes were tired, she noticed, with dark circles beneath them. "Just going over the accounts. Trying to figure out if I can afford to buy another dozen head of cattle next month." "Can you?" she asked, pouring herself water and sitting down across from him. He smiled slightly, and she realized it was the first time she had seen him really smile. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "Maybe. It will be close." She looked at the papers in front of him, seeing neat columns of numbers. "You have good handwriting," she observed. "My mother insisted I learn to read and write properly," he said. Said a man who could not do his own accounts would always be at someone else's mercy. His smile faded. "She died when I was 16, just before I ran off to war like a fool." "You were not a fool," Hannah said gently. "You were young and believed you were doing the right thing. There is no shame in that." He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "You have a kind heart, Hannah Harper." The way he said her name, low and rough and almost tender, made something flutter in her chest. She found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn to him by a force she could not name. "Zachary," she said softly, and his eyes darkened. For a moment she thought he might reach for her, might close the distance between them. But then he stood abruptly, gathering his papers. "It is late," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "We should both get some sleep." She felt a sharp pang of disappointment but nodded and stood as well. As she passed him on the way to the bedroom, their arms brushed, and she felt a spark of electricity at the contact. She heard his sharp intake of breath and knew he had felt it too. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm. She helped him with chores around the ranch, learning how to feed the chickens he kept for eggs, how to draw water from the well without spilling half of it, how to tell when the bread dough had risen enough. He taught her to ride properly, patiently correcting her posture and showing her how to guide the horse with subtle movements of her legs and shifts of her weight. She loved those riding lessons, loved the feeling of freedom as they cantered across the open desert, loved the way he rode beside her, always watchful, ready to help if she needed it but giving her room to learn. In the evenings, they sat on the porch and talked. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his parents and his two younger sisters who had both married and moved east after the war. She told him about Missouri, about her parents and her quiet life there, about how she had met her intended through an advertisement in a newspaper, and the carefully formal letters they had exchanged. "What is he like?" Zachary asked one evening, his voice carefully casual. "This man you are going to marry." Hannah tried to summon an image of Gerald Henderson, the shopkeeper in San Bernardino, but found she could barely remember what he looked like from the single photograph he had sent. "He seems kind," she said slowly. "Respectable. He owns his own business, which means he can provide well. He is looking for a wife to help him run the store and keep his house." "Do you love him?" The question was quiet but direct. Hannah was silent for a long moment. "I do not know him well enough to love him yet," she admitted. "But I hope that love will come with time. That is how it works for many people, is it not? The marriage comes first and then the love grows. Sometimes, Zachary said, but sometimes it does not. And what about you? She asked, turning to look at him. Has there been anyone in your life? He shook his head. There was a girl back in Texas before the war. She married someone else while I was away. Since then, I have been focused on building this place. He gestured at the ranch. Did not think I had anything to offer a woman. You have more to offer than you think, Hannah said softly. He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were intense. Hannah, he said, and there was something in the way he said her name that made her breath catch. I need to tell you something. What is it? He seemed to struggle with the words, his jaw tightening. These past few days, having you here, it has made me realize how lonely I have been. How empty this place feels with just me in it. He paused, looking down at his hands. I know you are promised to another man. I know you have your plans. But I need you to know that if things were different, if you were not already spoken for, I would ask you to stay. Hannah's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Zachary, I am not trying to make things difficult for you, he continued quickly. I just needed you to know. Before I take you to San Bernardino, before you marry Henderson, I needed you to know that there is another option. That you could stay here with me, if you wanted to. He finally looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. I have nothing much to offer you but this ranch and my 2 hands and a promise that I would work every day to make you happy. But if you would have me, Hannah, if you would agree to be my wife instead, I would count myself the luckiest man in Arizona. The words hung in the air between them, and Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. Her mind was whirling, torn between obligation and desire, between the practical choice and the choice of her heart. I do not know what to say, she whispered. Say you will think about it, he said. That is all I ask. We still have a few days before we leave for San Bernardino. Think about it and then tell me what you want. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. If you want to marry Henderson, I will take you to him and wish you well. But if you want to stay... He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle. If you want to stay, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that choice. Hannah looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-browned, work-roughened skin and her own paler fingers. She thought about Gerald Henderson, who she had never met, who was waiting for her in San Bernardino to fulfill a contract they had made through letters. And she thought about Zachary, who had saved her life, who had given her everything she needed without asking for anything in return, who looked at her like she was something precious and rare. I do not want to go to San Bernardino, she heard herself say, and once the words were out, she knew they were true. I do not want to marry a man I have never met, a man who wants a housekeeper and a shopkeeper's assistant, not a wife. I want... She looked up at him, her heart in her throat. I want to stay here with you, Zachary, if you truly mean what you said. The expression that crossed his face was pure, unguarded joy. I mean every word, he said roughly. Every single word. And then he was pulling her into his arms, and she was going willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling his heart racing beneath her cheek. His arms came around her, strong and warm, holding her like she was something infinitely valuable that he was afraid might break. I have been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you standing in the road, he said into her hair. I tried to tell myself it was impossible, that it was too fast, but I have never felt anything like this before, Hannah. Never. I know, she whispered. I feel it too. I did not understand what it was at first, but then I realized that the thought of leaving you, of never seeing you again, was unbearable. He pulled back just enough to look down at her, his hands coming up to cup her face. I want to do this properly, he said. I want to marry you right and true. Will you marry me, Hannah Harper? Will you be my wife? "Yes," she said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, Zachary Dalton, I will marry you." He kissed her then, soft and gentle at first, then deeper with a passion that made her knees weak. She had been kissed before, brief pecks from unsuitable suitors her mother had disapproved of, but nothing like this. This kiss was a promise and a claim and a question all at once, and she answered it with her whole heart, her arms winding around his neck, her fingers tangling in his hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I should ride into town tomorrow," he said. "Talk to the minister, see how soon he can perform the ceremony." "I do not need a big wedding," Hannah said. "I just need you. You will have me," he promised. "For the rest of our lives, you will have me." They rode into town the next morning, and Zachary spoke with Reverend Matthews, the circuit preacher who served the small settlement and the surrounding ranches. The Reverend agreed to perform the ceremony in 3 days' time, which would give them time to arrange for witnesses and make the necessary preparations. Mrs. Henderson was delighted when she heard the news and insisted on making Hannah a proper wedding dress. "Nothing fancy," she said, "but something nice. Every bride deserves to feel special on her wedding day." Hannah also insisted that Zachary compose a letter to Gerald Henderson explaining the situation. It was the honorable thing to do, to tell the man that she would not be coming, that she had found someone else. Zachary wrote the letter carefully, apologizing for the inconvenience and offering to reimburse Henderson for any expenses he had incurred in preparing for Hannah's arrival. It was a thoughtful, respectful letter, and Hannah loved him even more for taking the time to craft it properly. The 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Zachary built a new bed frame, saying he wanted their marriage to start with them sharing a proper bed, not him sleeping on the floor. Hannah worked with Mrs. Henderson on the dress and helped Zachary clean and organize the house. They stole moments together whenever they could, kisses that left her breathless, quiet conversations about their hopes and dreams for the future. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the sky a brilliant blue dome overhead. Hannah dressed in the new gown Mrs. Henderson had made, a simple but elegant creation of ivory cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Henderson helped her arrange her hair, pinning it up and weaving tiny wildflowers through the dark curls. "You look beautiful," the older woman said warmly. "Zachary is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Hannah said, meaning it with all her heart. The ceremony was held in the small church at the edge of town, with Mrs. Henderson and her husband serving as witnesses along with a few other townspeople who had heard about the wedding and wanted to attend. Zachary stood at the front of the church in a new shirt and his best trousers, his hair neatly combed, his eyes locked on Hannah as she walked down the aisle toward him. She had never seen him look at her quite like that before, with such open adoration and desire and tenderness all mixed together. It made her feel cherished and wanted and deeply, profoundly loved. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony with simple dignity, speaking about the sacred bonds of marriage and the importance of love and commitment. When it came time for the vows, Zachary took both of her hands in his and looked directly into her eyes. "I, Zachary Dalton, take you, Hannah Harper, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his deep voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you and cherish you, to provide for you and protect you, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us. This I vow before God and these witnesses." Hannah's voice shook slightly as she repeated her own vows, but she meant every word. "I, Hannah Harper, take you, Zachary Dalton, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you and honor you, to stand by your side and be your partner in joy and in sorrow, for better or worse, until death parts us. This I vow before God and these witnesses." Zachary had procured a simple gold band, which he slipped onto her finger with trembling hands. And then, Reverend Matthews was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Zachary was kissing her, gentle and sweet, while the small congregation applauded. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was beginning its descent, and Hannah felt as if she were floating. She was married. She was Zachary's wife. The words seemed impossible and wonderful all at once. At the ranch, Zachary lifted her down from the horse with infinite care, then swept her up in his arms, carrying her across the threshold of their home. Their home, she thought, and the rightness of it made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. He set her down gently in the middle of the main room, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, the weight of what they had just done settling over them. "I am your wife," Hannah said wonderingly. "And I am your husband," Zachary replied, reaching up to cup her cheek. "My wife." Hannah Dalton. Hearing her new name on his lips sent a thrill through her. She leaned into his touch, her eyes drifting closed. "I was afraid," she admitted softly. "Afraid that I would never find this. That I would end up in a cold marriage of convenience, going through the motions but never really living. But then you found me, and everything changed." "I was afraid too," he said. "Afraid of being alone for the rest of my life. Afraid that I had nothing to offer anyone, that all I would ever be was a broken soldier with a small ranch and too many memories." He opened his eyes and looked at her with such intensity it took her breath away. "But you make me believe in things I thought I had lost. You make me want to be better, to build something that matters." She kissed him then, rising on her toes to press her lips to his, and he responded with a hunger that made her blood sing. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she could feel the rapid beating of his heart against hers. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I love you so much, Zachary." "And I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "more than I thought I could ever love anyone." He picked her up again and carried her to the bedroom, to the new bed he had built for them, and they came together with a passion and tenderness that left them both shaken and breathless. Later, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, Hannah felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. This was where she belonged. This was home. The next weeks and months passed in a haze of happiness. Hannah threw herself into learning how to be a rancher's wife, how to manage the household, and help Zachary with the work that never seemed to end. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove, to preserve vegetables and fruits for the winter, to mend clothes and make soap, and 100 other tasks that were necessary for their survival. But more than that, she learned Zachary himself, all the little details that made him who he was. She learned that he liked his coffee strong and black, that he had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking hard about something, that he sometimes had nightmares about the war and needed her to hold him until they passed. She learned that he was generous to a fault, always ready to help a neighbor in need, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he loved the desert sunrise and would often wake before dawn just to watch the sky change colors, and that he sang to the horses in a low, tuneless voice that somehow calmed even the most skittish animal. And Zachary learned her in turn. He learned that she was stronger than she looked, that she never complained even when the work was hard and her hands were blistered and sore. He learned that she had a beautiful singing voice and would hum to herself while she worked, that she was clever with numbers and could help him balance his accounts, that she had a gift for growing things and soon had a small garden flourishing beside the house. He learned that she was kind and compassionate, always setting out scraps for the stray dogs that sometimes wandered onto the property, and that she had a stubborn streak a mile wide when she felt she was in the right. They grew together, learning to move in tandem, to anticipate each other's needs and thoughts. They had their arguments, of course, passionate disagreements about everything from how to handle a difficult horse to whether they could afford to expand the herd. But they always talked through their differences, always ended the day in each other's arms, and the love between them only deepened with time. 6 months after their wedding, Hannah realized she was with child. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she wanted to be certain before she told Zachary. When she finally shared the news one evening over dinner, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction, she saw shock and then joy bloom across his features. "A baby," he said, his voice almost reverent. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," she said, smiling through sudden tears. "In about 6 months, I think." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her to her feet and into his arms, holding her with exquisite gentleness, as if she might break. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Hannah, this is. I do not have words. Are you happy?" She asked, even though she could see the answer written plainly on his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said. He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "You have given me everything, Hannah. A home, a purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning with hope instead of dread, and now a child." His voice cracked slightly. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I swear I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of this gift." The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, barely able to keep anything down, and Zachary hovered over her anxiously, bringing her water and crackers and ginger tea, doing everything he could think of to ease her discomfort. As she grew bigger, the Arizona heat became oppressive, and she spent the hottest parts of the day resting in the shade of the porch while Zachary insisted on taking over most of her usual chores. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she protested when he refused to let her help with the heavier work. "I know that," he said patiently, "but humor me. I want to take care of you," and he did, with a devotion that sometimes brought tears to her eyes. He rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings, brought her wildflowers to brighten the house, talked to her growing belly and told their unborn child stories about the ranch and the desert and the life they would have together. Hannah gave birth on a cool November morning with Mrs. Henderson attending as midwife. It was long and painful, and there were moments when she thought she could not endure another second. But Zachary was there beside her the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement and love. When their son finally entered the world, red-faced and squalling, Zachary wept openly, tears streaming down his face as Mrs. Henderson placed the tiny, perfect baby in his arms. "He is beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Hannah, he is perfect." They named him Thomas, after Zachary's father, and he was indeed perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Zachary was a devoted father from the very beginning, rising in the night to walk with the baby when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours simply holding his son and marveling at the tiny miracle they had created. Hannah watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. She had known he was a good man, but seeing him as a father revealed depths of tenderness and patience she had not fully appreciated before. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that revolved around Thomas's needs and the continuing demands of the ranch. It was exhausting and challenging, and sometimes frustrating, but it was also filled with moments of profound joy. Thomas's first smile, his first laugh, the way his whole face lit up when Zachary came in from working outside. The quiet evenings when the three of them sat together on the porch, Thomas falling asleep in Hannah's arms while she and Zachary talked and watched the stars come out. As Thomas grew, The ranch prospered. Zachary had saved enough to buy more cattle, and Hannah's careful management of their finances meant they were able to weather the occasional bad year without too much hardship. They added on to the house, building a separate room for Thomas and expanding the kitchen. Zachary trained more horses, building a reputation throughout the territory as a skilled and patient horseman, and Hannah started selling eggs and vegetables to people in town, adding to their income. When Thomas was 3 years old, Hannah found herself pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She had her mother's dark hair but her father's strong features, and she was a quieter baby than Thomas had been, content to observe the world with solemn eyes. Zachary loved both his children fiercely, but Hannah saw something special in the way he looked at his daughter, a softness that was different from how he was with his son. He was endlessly patient with Sarah, letting her toddle after him while he did his chores, carrying her on his shoulders so she could see the world from a great height, reading to her from the few books they owned in that same low, steady voice he used to calm the horses. Thomas, meanwhile, was already showing signs of his father's love for the land and the animals. He followed Zachary everywhere, asking endless questions about the horses and the cattle, begging to be allowed to help with even the smallest tasks. Zachary taught him how to feed the chickens, how to check the water troughs, how to approach a horse calmly and confidently. And in the evenings when the work was done, he would tell both children stories about his own childhood in Texas, carefully editing out the harder parts, focusing instead on the adventures and the lessons learned. Hannah often sat and watched her family during those evening storytelling sessions, her heart so full she thought it might burst. This life they had built together, this family, it was more than she had ever dared to dream of when she had been standing alone beside that overturned stagecoach 7 years ago. One evening, after the children were asleep, she and Zachary sat on the porch as they so often did, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "You ever think about what would have happened if you had not come along that day?" she asked softly. "If someone else had found me, or if no one had found me at all?" "I try not to," Zachary admitted. "The thought of you dying out there in the desert, or of you going on to San Bernardino and marrying Henderson, it makes my blood run cold." "I would not have been happy with him," Hannah said with certainty. "I can see that now. I would have had a comfortable life perhaps, but not a joyful one, not a life filled with love." "Do you have any regrets?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "About choosing this life, I mean." "It has not always been easy. There have been hard times, lean times." Hannah sat up so she could look him in the eye. "Not a single regret," she said firmly. "Yes, it has been hard sometimes. Yes, there have been moments when I was tired or scared or uncertain. But I have never once regretted choosing this life. You gave me everything, Zachary. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love that I feel in every cell of my body. How could I possibly regret that?" He smiled, that rare, transformative smile that still made her heart skip a beat even after all these years. "I am the one who should be grateful," he said. "You took a chance on a broken-down cowboy with nothing but a small ranch and big dreams. You made this house a home. You gave me children, a reason to build something that will last beyond my own lifetime." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch tender. "I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I loved you desperately even then. I did not know it was possible to love someone this much. I know," she whispered, leaning in to kiss him, "because I feel the same way about you." The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were droughts that tested their resources and their resolve. years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight. There were illnesses and injuries, moments of genuine fear when one of the children had a high fever, or when Zachary was thrown by a horse and broke his arm. There were conflicts with neighbors over water rights and land boundaries, problems that required patience and diplomacy to resolve. But there were far more good times than bad. Watching Thomas learn to ride his first horse, his face glowing with pride and excitement. Sarah's first day of school in town, looking so grown up in the dress Hannah had made for her. The year they had a bumper crop from the garden, and Hannah spent weeks preserving and pickling and making jam, the kitchen filled with the sweet smell of cooking fruit. The addition of more rooms to the house as the children grew and needed more space. The way Thomas started helping his father with the horses, showing the same patience and intuitive understanding that Zachary possessed. When Thomas was 15 and Sarah was 12, Hannah gave birth to twins, boys they named William and James. The pregnancy had been a surprise, and she had worried about complications given her age, but both babies were healthy and strong if demanding. Thomas and Sarah pitched in to help care for their younger brothers, and the house was filled with noise and laughter, and the controlled chaos of a large family. Zachary handled the expansion of their family with the same steady calm he brought to everything else. He built more beds, expanded the barn to accommodate more animals, worked longer hours to provide for all of them. But he never complained, and he always made time for each of his children, whether it was helping Thomas train a particularly difficult horse, reading to Sarah from the novels she loved, or simply sitting with the twins and teaching them to whittle simple shapes from pieces of wood. Hannah watched him with their children and marveled at the man he had become. The silent, watchful cowboy who had saved her life all those years ago had blossomed into a devoted husband and father, a pillar of their small community, a man respected and admired by everyone who knew him. He had built something remarkable out of almost nothing, and he had done it through sheer determination and hard work, and an unflinching commitment to the people he loved. One autumn evening, when the twins were 5 years old and the older children were helping with dinner, Zachary pulled Hannah aside and led her out to the porch. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple, painting the desert in shades of fire and shadow. "I have been thinking," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head, "about how far we have come, about everything we have built together." "And," she prompted, leaning back against him, "and I realized that I have never properly thanked you," he said, "for taking a chance on me, for seeing something in me worth believing in when I was not sure I believed in myself, for giving me this life, this family. Everything good in my world is because of you, Hannah." She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to touch his face. There was silver in his hair now, and lines around his eyes and mouth that had not been there when they met, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "You are wrong," she said gently. "Everything good in my world is because of you. You saved my life, Zachary. Not just that day in the desert, but every day since. You gave me a home when I had nothing. You gave me love when I did not even know what real love looked like. You gave me these children, this beautiful, chaotic, wonderful life. If anyone should be grateful, it is me." "Then let us agree that we are both grateful," he said, smiling, "and both incredibly lucky to have found each other." "I can agree to that," she said, and kissed him, long and deep and sweet, the way she had been kissing him for 25 years now. From inside the house, they could hear the children laughing and the sound of Sarah calling that dinner was ready. Zachary took Hannah's hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and together they walked back inside to the warmth and light and love that filled their home. As the years rolled on, their children grew and began to make their own ways in the world. Thomas married a local girl named Elizabeth and took over more and more of the ranch's operations, allowing Zachary to slow down a bit and take things easier. Sarah met a teacher from back east who had come west seeking adventure, and they fell deeply in love. She married him in the same small church where Hannah and Zachary had wed, and Hannah wept tears of joy as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle. The twins, William and James, were inseparable and showed every sign of remaining so. They talked about starting their own ranch someday, pooling their resources and building something together. Zachary encouraged them, offering advice and promising to help however he could when the time came. Hannah and Zachary became grandparents, and then grandparents again, and then again. Their house was often filled with the sounds of visiting children and grandchildren, and they both loved every noisy, chaotic minute of it. But they also treasured the quiet times, the evenings when it was just the two of them again, sitting on the porch and talking or simply being together in comfortable silence. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Zachary arranged a surprise for Hannah. He had been secretive for weeks, disappearing into town on mysterious errands, and she had been consumed with curiosity. On the morning of their anniversary, he blindfolded her and led her outside, then removed the blindfold with a flourish. She gasped. There in the yard stood a beautiful gazebo, constructed of whitewashed wood with a shingled roof and benches built into the sides. Climbing roses, which he must have planted weeks ago, were already beginning to twine up the corner posts. "I thought you might like a special place to sit in the evenings," he said, sounding almost shy. "Somewhere just for us. The children and grandchildren can use the porch. This will be ours." Hannah threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. "It is perfect," she said. "You are perfect. I love you so much, Zachary Dalton." "And I love you, Hannah Dalton," he replied, holding her close. "Today and always." They spent many evenings in that gazebo, watching the sun set over the desert they both loved, talking about their lives and their children and their memories. Sometimes they did not talk at all, content to simply be together, her hand in his, their shoulders touching, the silence between them comfortable and complete. As they aged, Zachary's hair went entirely silver, and his once strong body began to show the effects of decades of hard work. He developed a slight limp from an old injury that had never quite healed properly, and his hands, which had once been so steady and sure, sometimes trembled with arthritis. But his eyes, those startling blue eyes that had captured Hannah's heart so many years ago, remained sharp and clear, and they still looked at her with the same love and devotion they always had. Hannah's dark hair turned gray and then white, and her face acquired lines that spoke of years of laughter and love and hard work under the desert sun. Her hands became gnarled from decades of cooking and cleaning and working in her garden, and she moved more slowly than she once had. But her smile remained bright, and her spirit remained strong, and she faced each new day with gratitude for the life she had been given. On a cool spring morning in their 52nd year of marriage, Hannah woke to find Zachary already up and dressed, standing by the window and looking out at the desert he had loved his entire adult life. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Come back to bed," she said sleepily. "It is too early to be up." He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "I have been thinking about the day I found you," he said. "Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," she said, sitting up. "How could I forget?" "You were standing by that overturned stagecoach," he continued, "wearing a torn dress and looking so lost and alone. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in dust and scared half to death." I was terrified, Hannah admitted. And then you rode up, and I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone look so solid and real and trustworthy. He walked over to the bed and sat down beside her, taking her hand. I fell in love with you that first day, he said. I did not know it then, or maybe I did not want to admit it because you were promised to someone else. But my heart knew. And then when you agreed to marry me instead when you chose me. He shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. That was the happiest day of my life. Well, that and the days each of our children were born. Mine too, Hannah said, squeezing his hand. All of them. Every day with you has been a gift, Zachary. He leaned over and kissed her forehead, then her cheek, then her lips, tender and sweet. I've had a good life, he said softly. Better than I ever dreamed possible, and it is all because of you. They spent that day together, visiting with Thomas and Elizabeth and their children. Walking through the garden Hannah still tended with the help of her grandchildren, sitting in their gazebo and watching the sun move across the sky. It was an ordinary day, filled with ordinary moments, but it was also perfect in its simplicity. That night, as they lay in bed together, Zachary pulled Hannah close, her head resting on his chest as it had so many thousands of times before. I love you, he whispered into the darkness. I always have and I always will. No matter what happens, remember that. I love you too, she whispered back, and they fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms. He did not wake up the next morning. Hannah found him at dawn, still holding her hand even in death, his face peaceful and free from pain. She sat with him for a long time, crying silently, memorizing every line of his beloved face before finally calling for Thomas. The funeral was well attended. Zachary had been known and respected throughout the territory, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. Hannah stood dry-eyed through the service, her children on either side of her, and listened as person after person spoke about Zachary's kindness, his integrity, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. She was proud of the life he had lived, proud of the man he had been, even as her heart broke with the loss of him. In the months that followed, she struggled to adjust to life without him. The house felt too empty, too quiet, even when it was filled with visiting children and grandchildren. She kept herself busy with her garden and her grandchildren, and the many tasks that came with managing a household. But there was a hollowness inside her that nothing could fill. She spent hours in the gazebo he had built for her, sitting on the bench and looking out at the desert, remembering. She remembered the day they met, the first time he kissed her, their wedding day, the birth of each of their children, the countless evenings they had spent talking and laughing and simply being together. The memories were bittersweet, bringing both comfort and pain. Thomas tried to convince her to move into the main house with him and Elizabeth, but she refused. "This is my home," she said firmly. "This is where your father and I built our life together. I am not ready to leave it yet." So she stayed, and gradually, slowly, she found a kind of peace. She began to notice the beauty of the world again. The way the light fell across the desert in the early morning, the songs of the birds, the laughter of her grandchildren playing in the yard. She thought about Zachary every day, talked to him sometimes when she was alone, and felt his presence in the house they had shared for so many years. On what would have been their 55th wedding anniversary, Hannah woke before dawn and walked out to the gazebo. She sat down on the bench and watched the sun rise, just as she and Zachary had done so many times together. The desert stretched out before her, vast and beautiful and eternal, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been given such an extraordinary gift, she realized. So many people went through life never knowing real love, never finding that one person who made everything else make sense. But she had found that person, or rather he had found her, riding out of the desert like something from a storybook to save her life and change it forever. "Thank you," she whispered to the morning air, to the memory of the man she had loved for more than half a century. "Thank you for everything, Zachary. Thank you for giving me this life, this family, this love. I will carry it with me always until the day I join you again." And she sat there as the sun rose higher in the sky, surrounded by the land they had loved together, feeling his presence in the warm morning breeze and the endless beauty of the desert they had called home. Hannah lived for another 10 years, watching her grandchildren grow and begin to have children of their own. She became a matriarch of sorts, the keeper of family stories and traditions, the one everyone turned to for advice and comfort. She taught her granddaughters how to bake bread and tend a garden, shared with her grandsons the lessons about horses and cattle that Zachary had taught her. She presided over family gatherings with grace and warmth, and though she never stopped missing Zachary, she found joy in the legacy they had built together. On a quiet summer evening, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Zachary had created, Hannah slipped away in her sleep. She was 91 years old, and according to her children and grandchildren who were with her at the end, she went peacefully, a small smile on her face, as if she were dreaming of something wonderful. They buried her beside Zachary in the small cemetery outside of town, under a tree they had planted together decades ago. The headstone was simple, bearing both their names and a single line that Thomas had chosen: "Together always." And they were together, in the memories of their children and grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore the Dalton name, in the stories that were passed down through the generations about the cowboy who saved a woman from the desert, and the woman who taught him what it meant to truly live. Their love story became legend in that part of Arizona, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. But at its heart, it remained what it had always been: simple, honest, and true. A woman who had nothing but the clothes she wore met a cowboy who gave her everything and asked only for her hand. And she gave it to him gladly, along with her heart, her life, and her unwavering love. And together they built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes, a legacy of love and family and hard work and devotion that would echo through the years for generations to come.